Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for our special Building Motivated and High-Performing Teams webinar. I'm Mara Newman. I'm the Events and Marketing Coordinator at NECA Victoria. Today, we are joined by Jamie Phillips, who is the Events, Membership, and Communications Manager at SA. And returning back with us today is Ray Hodge. He is a business consultant and advisor, and he specializes in national trade and construction companies. He has experience in streamlining workflows, strategic planning, leadership development, and coaching. Before we begin, I just want to go through some housekeeping rules. So we encourage questions throughout the presentation today. Just please enter them in the chat box and Ray will get to those as he goes along. If we don't get to answer your question today or within this hour, we will get back to you via email and we'll share it with all our listeners today. I will now pass it to Ray to begin today's presentation.
Thanks, Mara. Much appreciated. Well, it's good to have you all here. And I was just saying to Jamie and Mara before that I typically do this kind of work, coaching work around people change and people management over a period of 6 months. And so we're squeezing it all into the space of an hour today. And what I intend to do is give you the fundamentals today rather than too much on the outside of things. I've been working with people for the best part of 40 years in my own businesses. I coach, consult these days, as Mara mentioned. I've been doing that for 15 years. Come out of running my own teams and then in general management construction. So almost 100% of my work is construction trade related. So I've learned a few things along the way through failure and success. And so what I'm talking about today is really the application. While I study theory, and particularly in the areas of motivation and behaviorism, people's behavior and the impact of that in the workplace and in life, today's really what I actually see works. And I'd really encourage you to use the chat function. If you've got questions along the way, I'll see those come through. Hopefully I won't get too distracted by just looking at myself. Normally I can see people, but the way this is set up, I'm just seeing myself. So that's always a bit distracting in its own right, till I get used to it. I was thinking today, the other thing is, I think Mara would have sent in the email, just if you've got some pen and paper handy or something you can type into, that'd be handy, because I'll get you to do a couple of little exercises along the way. All right, I was reflecting on the title of this webinar, Building Motivated and High-Performing Teams, something to that effect. And I was thinking of the word, particularly teams, and a lot of places will do team building days. They'll climb trees, they'll take people to islands, do a whole lot of things, which is very valid. And I've been involved in some of those along the way. But the thing I've become convinced of, and this is where I want to start today, is that high-performing teams are made up of engaged individuals. High-performing teams are made up of engaged individuals, and those engaged individuals demonstrate personal motivation or self-volition and productivity to whatever extent they do. And so today I want to be able to zero in on that perspective of the individual, because I think that's where it starts. And in a lot of my work, in the majority of my work, probably 99% of it, it's all with the individual. And I'd like to share a couple of stories just to begin with. A number of years ago, I got invited, I had a phone call from a business owner in Sydney, electrician, possibly a NECA member, I can't remember now. And he said, my leading hand needs a hand. He needs a help with his leadership. He said he's got 8 to 10 people in his team and it is incredibly inefficient. I need you to make the team efficient and I want you to work with him. I said, yep, game on. So anyway, I met with this guy, still remember it. And my first question, one of my first questions to him was, tell me something personal about each of your team. Tell me about your team members. He could only tell me one thing about one person. So you might guess what his homework was for the next 3 months. It was to find out about his team. And I said to him, every week, you don't have to do it every day, just intermittently, just take an interest in them. Find out what they did on the weekend, what they did last night. If you find something like you did along the way that someone's partner was in hospital, just ask how they're going. And I said, even practice on the checkout girls and guys at Coles and Woolies and wherever you go and ask them how their day was. Right? So for most of us, that's, I know for me, it's just part of my life. I'm just interested in what people do without being prying. Anyway, he to his credit, he did this over a period of 3 months. 3 months later, that was all we did. I didn't focus on workflows, productivity rates, didn't analyze anything. 3 months in, the business owner phones me up and says, job done. I said, what do you mean? He said, the team is functioning beautifully. He said, they're efficient, they're productive, they're exactly where I wanted them to be. And that was just from this guy taking an interest in his people. And he confided in me sometime after, to his credit. He said, the reason I never liked asking people about themselves was I didn't want them asking about me. And he actually had to drop his own guard in order to get into the world of others. I'm currently coaching a divisional leader. I got to mention before, my smallest company, I'm working with about 30 people overall, probably about 20 companies at the moment. Smallest is 2 people. The largest have 1,700 people. And I'm working with one of the divisional managers of that company. And I was called in by the managers. They were expressing some concern around the team and really just wanted this guy to be supported in his leadership. And so I asked him at the start of it, I said, tell me about you and your team and how you approach the start of your day and when you're in the office. He said, well, I get to the office and I go straight through the office and I go to my desk and I start to work. And I said, do you say good morning and whatnot? It's, yeah, sometimes. This guy's a genuine guy, salt of the earth guy, incredibly personable as a human, but he was very much in work mode. So I said to him, when you walk in, lift your head, say good morning to your colleagues and go and have a coffee, 10, 15 minutes with your team and just chit chat, engage, find out what they did and chat. The other thing I've said to him along the way, I've been working with him for 4 or 5 months, and I asked him to not only take an interest in his team, but ask his team what help they needed, what support they needed. Anyway, about 6 weeks into working with him, 2 of his team come up laughing, taking the piss, and said to him, what's changed? Since when have you become such a nice bloke? Something's changed. What are you doing? A course? What's happened to you? And they had noticed a significant difference and really became a much more cohesive as a team. Another guy had asked to be out of the team prior to working together. And he wanted to come back in, this is 3 months into it, and said, I can see everything change. I can see that there's a whole increased level of support I want back in. And again, this wasn't from any motivational theories and applications or anything. This was just for connecting with his team and supporting his team. The last story, a guy I worked with, fantastic business leader, oversaw a team of about 100 people. And I did a 360 review on him and others in his team. 360 review is when you get people in your orbit, those that report to you, you report to colleagues, to answer questions about you. I just asked them two simple things. There are about 16 in his orbit. What does he do well and what could he do better? 70% of the people, it was around about that weighting, said he could be more personable. And he looked at it, I remember when I gave it to him, and he's like, righto. And then overnight, he changed his behavior. 18 months into that project, one of the senior managers came up to me and said, the culture in this place has changed, and it's because of what you've done. Now, I think it's actually because of what that guy did. He changed his whole style. And this is where I've come to see that leadership, good leadership and good connection with people, taking a personal interest. It's not about personality, whether we're introvert, ambivert, extrovert. It's about the behaviors of interest we demonstrate in another person. Now, what I'd like you to do is just take a moment to write down 2 or 3 people in your team that you manage, and if you're not a manager or a leader and you have colleagues, 2 or 3 people that you think could do with a little bit more personal attention from you. I'll just give you 30 seconds to do that. Make sure you, as we go too, if you've got any questions about what I'm talking about, make sure you shoot them through on the chat as well. Now, the next thing I'd like you to write down is 3 variants of the same question. And I referenced this before with the leader I was mentioning about. First one is, how can I help you? How can I help you? Sometimes people get absolutely blown away when a manager or a leader asks that question. And there's another 2 variants of it. Is there anything I can be doing to make your job easier? That messes with some people's heads, especially if a manager asks an employee who they feel isn't doing much at all, how can I make your job easier? I love my job. I think it's, gosh, there's some funny things that happen along the way. And then the next one is, so that's, how can I help you? Is there anything I can be doing to make your job easier? How can I better support you? Those questions just often connect. One of the guys I've been working with asked one of his team members that. The guy was flabbergasted. He just didn't know what to say. It was just like a bomb hit him from left field. All right, so that's the whole foundation of taking a personal interest. And I just find, and I've found over time, that a lot of leaders, a lot of managers, a lot of business owners, and this is just relevant, and the demand of the day, we're so focused on doing the work that we forget about those who are doing the work and investing into them. And that's the nature of the beast. If you guys, especially if you're in service-based businesses, and it's just reactive, and I'm working with numerous electricians and plumbers at the moment, it's just a tough gig to be able to do that. But I've found that the people who do it through the course of the day, they don't even have to set aside time for connection. They just do it and take an interest in people. It just really engages their team. All right, I'm going to share the screen and go into this next section, the section that I've called Leadership from the Side. So hopefully I'll get all of this sharing stuff right. And this isn't working, and it was before. Here we go. All right, so I've called this one, to start this section, which we're doing, a leadership from the side. Leadership from afar. Now, my question here for you, and obviously I can't see you, and my chat function is just flicked off just because I'm sharing the screen. So anyway, I'll come back to that afterwards. Do you think this guy has any influence on the players in the game, assuming there's footy players up to the right? Do you think he's got any influence on helping a team win? All right, no, zero. He's exerting, trying to exert his leadership and influence, but he's not going to happen. And I've seen that a lot of leaders think that the louder they yell, the more people are going to be productive and do what they're meant to do. But I've really seen that is not so much the case. This one, I thought, was a little bit like the workplace. We got the guy on the right with the drum, beating the drum. We'll take him as the manager leader. And we got the team who he's trying to communicate to. They've got all their protective gear on. And I've noticed in a lot of workplaces, especially when I start working with people, there's this protection that they've got on. It's like, oh yeah, he's saying this again, and it just essentially goes past their ears. And it was essentially like me when I was growing up with my parents. It's like, oh yeah, here goes mum again. And it's sometimes it just doesn't change as we grow older in the workplace. So what I'd like you to do is take your pens, and I'd like you to write this quote down up on the top right side. People are generally doing the best they can. This is a quote by Brené Brown. People are generally doing the best they can. Now, I can't see the chat facility at the moment, like I mentioned, because my whole screen's full of this slide, and I'll stop it in a bit and go back to it, see if there's any questions. But I was running an online course, which I'll mention to you at the end, that you're welcome to join on this whole thing of working with people. And I asked them, out of what percentage, out of 100%, do you believe that? Do you believe this? And it's a jarring statement. I remember the first time I read it, I'm like, sure, no, that's not true. They're not. I can be doing better. Everyone can be doing better. And so the guys there were, 80%, 50%. I think one guy was 40% of how they believed it, of what they believed. I've sat with this for many, many years. And this has been the approach that I've taken in my coaching work. And I've seen some amazing transformations, of which there's too many to talk about. But I've learned to approach everyone as if they're doing the best they can. Now, the reason is, if you have a look at the behavioral performance influences in the background of the people in our teams, there is a lot going on. We've got their personality to deal with, their physical and mental health, their addictions and personal struggles. And a lot of this stuff we don't know. It's underneath their financial situation, the stresses or the joys, their family history. And that one can actually have a major impact. Their current relationships and home situation, their skill sets and abilities, their values, ambitions and goals, their emotional intelligence, their interests and hobbies, their motivations, general attitudes. And that's probably only the start. So when I approach the whole thing of change management for someone or improvement in any particular area, I've been going in with that whole concept that this person right now, given that their whole history, their current skill sets, all of this stuff, is probably doing the best they can. Brene goes on, and this is from her book, Rising Strong. And I'd encourage you to research her. She's a researcher, done a lot of in the field of shame research, vulnerability. And she says it can be painful for leaders to answer this question, are people doing the best they can? Because what often comes up is the realization that instead of prodding and pushing someone, they need to move on to the difficult task of helping them, reassigning them, or letting them go. And the prodding and pushing, or the yelling from afar, this is a whole shit of helping, reassigning, or letting them go. She says it doesn't mean that we stop helping people set goals or that we stop expecting people to grow and change. It means that we stop respecting and evaluating people based on what we think they should accomplish and start respecting them for who they are and holding them accountable for what they're actually doing. That's a shift. It means that we stop loving people for who they could be and start loving them for who they are. It means that sometimes when we're beating the crap out of ourselves, we need to stop and say to that harassing voice inside, man, I'm doing the very best I can right now. If we had time, I would just, and you were in the audience, we would push this around, but we don't have time and we don't have any real way of being able to feed that back. And I'll send this to Jamie as well, the slideshow, so you can reflect a little bit on that. But this is what I have discovered in my 40 years. This whole concept of leadership from the side. And this is not the greatest photo, but I think it conveys something of leadership from the side. This is really, for me, connects at a relationship level. It's personable, looks like the guy in the white is explaining something, and it's one step at a time together. So, any questions or reflections on that? Just you can use the chat function. I'd like to hear from someone, please. Talking to myself is just, you know. Any comments? Is that a helpful concept at this point of time? I'm going to move on to another area soon. How can I help you? It's a great question. And that's when people say that, it's like I said before, it just blows some people out of the water. But just feel free to send through any reflections on that. And whether you agree with it or not doesn't matter. I just found that it started to just rattle my cage, and it's changed my whole approach to people. I'll mention one person I worked with, and there was a question that came through about how do I motivate those who don't want to work? Oh, okay. So the question, yes, okay, I get that. The first in those series of 3 questions, how can I help you? Is there anything I can be doing to make your job easier? Justin's asked this. And then the third was, how can I better support you? How can I better support you? So someone sent through a question before the webinar, was how do I motivate those who don't want to work? Right? Great question. Now, motivation is contextual. You can see that list there. It's such, the variables are so many within a person when you're working with them. And for me, it's all about the individual. There's no one size really fits all, although there are general conditions. But I was asked in an industrial firm to raise the performance of an account manager. And he was currently operating at 50% under budget. And the business owner said, in the next 6 months of you working together, I want to see him reach budget. And I want your help. So anyway, meeting this guy, he came across as very unmotivated, just the way he walked, talked, dressed. So I did what I've learned to do now is I got to know him. I just spent 2 or 3 sessions just, having a chat and seeing, what life was like for him. Every time we talked, he talked about his wife and his kids. Every single time. He would always get onto that. And he just worked to make a bit of money to get home. But he had a commission structure in place. But he was just 50%, just flying under the radar, doing what he had to do. Anyway, he knew that we had to increase performance. And when I looked at him and talked with him, I'm like, oh, geez, I don't know how I'm going to do this. So anyway, I said to him, what do you want to do with your family this year? He said, well, I'm planning on taking them to Disneyland. I said, how much is that going to cost? And I wrote it down, 20K, whatever it was. I said, what else? And he said, I want to take my kids, I want to put my kids into private school. I never had that opportunity, and I'd love to see that for him. And I said, how much is that per annum? And I wrote it down. So what I had done, I'd got his commission calculator with the budgets prior to our meeting because this had triggered in my brain. And so I put in the amount that he needed to go to Disneyland and it calculated the relevant sales he had to get. Then I put in his kids' schooling and it calculated the sales he had to get. And then I put in a bit of extra to give, an increase. And I showed him. And I remember the moment the lights came on. It was just like he saw that his work could support his highest value. And this just came from listening and understanding what his internal drivers were. And I was able to link his work to his productivity. And from there on, it was easy. Now, I wish everyone was like that story. But then it was a case of helping him as he went and building in the steps and the skill sets and the abilities to be a good account manager, to manage his time, his accounts, his areas, streamlining his travel and so forth. But we dealt with that underlying linked his work to his highest value, and motivation took off. He was motivated. And as I said, it'd be nice if it was like that for everyone, but it's different for everyone because everyone's got different things going on and are motivated by different things. I often think it's like a coach with the pole vaulter, for example. You get someone who's young, they might be jumping 3 meters. I think the record's 6.26 from what I understand. And it's like a coach just looking up, putting the bar up to 5 meters and saying, jump, you bastard, jump. That's where you've got to be. And of course, someone who's jumping 3 probably can't jump 5 overnight. I don't know anything about pole vaulting, but as a good coach, you would actually have to work with them to keep increasing their height, their mindset, skill sets, abilities, nutrition, rest, and so forth to get to Olympic level. And I think leaders, and I put myself in this part as well, sometimes we fail because we have this leadership from a far perspective where we say, jump, you bastard, you should be performing here, where their skill set, abilities, mindset, and everything else that's going on in their world doesn't allow them to. And so then this whole concept of leadership from the side, just being able to take them one step at a time, understanding them and feel like they are supported. Okay, I've got a couple of little questions there. That's great. I've asked my staff how to help them and how to make their job easy and how to better support them, and they just say they are fine. What can I do next? Well, I think the key thing is then addressing where there are issues, and then being able to say to them, I noticed that you're struggling with this. You're not getting, for example, actually, I'm going to answer that one. Just let me come back to that one because I've got a slide on that one. Somebody else says, if the person admits they need help, but just not sure what help looks like. Oh, okay, yeah. They're unsure of what help they really need. Then it's an exploratory conversation, and it's really comes back to the manager being able to explore that with them. And that's essentially what I do, because I'm in situations all the time where I don't know the person. I might have first met them, and then it's exploring. And sometimes I might give them something to read, something to research, something down that line that's within the context of what they're talking about. So, and this is where these even answering these questions are tricky, because it's a lot of it is the all depends. So come back to me, Rachel, if you want to just ask a little bit more. I'm just going to flick across to this where people say they are fine. What can we do next? So let me just go here. Okay, so I'm not sure if this is going to answer it actually, but anyway, I'll have a shot and then I'll come back to it. So this is a leadership model from afar. The manager says, I need your monthly report. It was due 2 days ago. Employee, yeah, I had a few jobs come up, took priority. The manager, the report is a priority. I need you to get them to me on time in the future. You're constantly late. Employee, I'm not always late. Mostly you are. You need to get with the program, yada, yada. Employee, well, if you didn't load me up so much, I might be able to. And so you've got this constant resistance that's constantly building. But here's another way, and it comes back to this other question. Hey, Bob, I'd like to have a conversation about how we can get your monthly reports submitted on time. I've noticed you're under the pump. Is there anything we can adjust to make this easier for you? So I've just put there, notice the words how and we, and now the reports are the problem and not the employee who is wrong. And so coming back to Jodie's question, when they say they are fine, I think what's important is that if people are struggling or not reaching certain quotas, there's inefficiencies somewhere, there's some issue of just being able to address that personally with them. I remember one girl I worked with many years ago, and you guys will probably appreciate this. It was a a trade services company, electrical. And I said to the girl, I said, so, yeah, I was assigned to work with her because cash flow was being hammered. And I said to her, I said, oh, I noticed that you're the senior administration manager and whatever role she had. And I noticed that invoicing is a part of your gig, your role. She said, yep, yeah, I really enjoy it. Now, if I had have said to her at that point, what can I do better to support you? She probably would have said nothing. I'm just really enjoying it. Now, this, Jody, is where I don't know the full context. So I'm just communicating this and it might be well off the mark. But anyway, it goes to serve a point in the whole leadership side of it. I said to her, I said, how far are you behind in invoicing from job complete to invoice sent? And she said, oh, we're currently running at about 90 days. Right? Job complete, 90 days later, the invoice gets sent. So any of you running a trade services business or any business for that matter, if you're invoicing 90 days after, 3 months after, you know that there's probably another month or two after that is when you're going to get paid. And then if there's any queries on the invoices about the work, you've got to trace back 4 or 5 months. And it's bloody hard work to actually get paid in the end or the full amount. So obviously they were hemorrhaging cash. So I said to her, I said, well, cash is an issue. So I was straight up. I said, cash is an issue for the company. I think what we need to do is get back to within a week. And, how do you feel about that? And she's like, wow, 90 days back to 5 days. And we achieved it over 3 months. And I supported her along the way and gave them the tools, brought the team together, put in a reward that if they met their quota every week, they'd be able to pull up at Friday lunchtime and knock off for the afternoon or have an easy afternoon. And I put all of those steps in, helping them jump that, that extra 2 meters or whatever. But it came from an honest conversation up front. And then we talked through the support mechanisms to help her. So I don't know if that helps. Is there anything else while we're paused? I don't mind, Jody, Rachel, Justin, any or others, if you've got any other questions at this point. If anybody wants to send, I'm going to address another question that came through, and this is a really tricky one. I'm not sure who sent this one through. How do good leaders handle perpetually negative people? Being negative appears to be their comfort zone. That's a really tricky one. And this is where it all depends. And this is really hard for me to answer because there's no one size fits all. When you, again, I think back through that list of the behavioral performance influences of a person, there's so much goes on in this zone. But I'll tell you a story about a person that I worked with some time ago. On my first meeting with them, they told me everything that was wrong with the company, the workplace, the leadership, everything. And they started the whole conversation was can this be confidential? And I had already signed off with the boss to say confidential is fine. So anyway, they went for it. And you could say that person was reasonably negative. And so as the guy's going, I said to him, I love this. I said, this is fantastic. I said, you said something like, you're reasonably pessimistic and negative about things. And they're like, yep. I said, the great thing about pessimistic people, negative people, is that they see all the obstacles. Optimists see the destination, but they need pessimists and negative people to point out the obstacles along the way. I said, this is gold. This is awesome, right? So I validated what he was saying. Now I validated his feelings and what he was saying. Now I didn't know if it was true or not. That didn't matter at the time. I just said, this is great. And I essentially found the gold in that communication. And I said, it sounds like, you're very committed to this company and you really want to see it, thrive. And he says, yes. And it shits me that, everyone's sitting on their ass and doing nothing and not doing this thing. So anyway, that got us on the same page. And so over the course of a few months, I gave him that space to be able to share that and validate it. Thank you so much. This is awesome. Then I started pointing out the changes that were happening. And I said, did you notice that what we talked about is starting to shift in that person? He said, yeah, I did notice that. So over the course of a number of months, I started just sowing in the positive and getting him to agree with me, and which he did all along the way. And that really shifted the tone of conversations because I validated what he was saying, honored his thoughts and his feelings, and then moved the journey together. Another way, and this is something that you may take on, and again, negativity is very broad, and if whoever asked this, you're more than welcome to have a phone call with me, and any of you are for that matter, and talk through anything over the next couple of weeks. But my process here is when someone's negative, similar to this guy, seems like things are tough for you at the moment. What's happening? So I'm validating it and getting them to say, and then I reflect back. So what you're saying is management's pissing you off, yeah? And they're not doing anything to help you, yeah? Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. So then I say, well, given that, what options do you see moving forward? I want to start opening up the world and start talking forward conversation. What do you think should change? What do you think could change within you? And if I was their manager, what do you think we could do together to bring that change? So I'm giving them some hope and possibility. The other one that you can use, and I learned this from my partner, she's a psychologist, is if they said, management's a real problem, for example, that was the issue. If you said, well, out of 10, how possible do you think that change is? And if they said 2 out of 10, for example, then my question, I used this with a construction manager recently, and he did this with his team. So if they give a 2 out of 10, I say, why is that not lower? And they say, well, I see that Bobby has got some potential, and I think he might be able to change, but it's doubtful. So what you've just done is you've highlighted that there's some optimism. Now, if it's 0 out of 10, then, it might be time to talk to NECA Legal and figure out how to move them on. But it's again coming back to this place that people are generally doing the best they can. And that scoring system is really helpful because most people say, well, why isn't it higher? But when you say, why isn't it lower? It gives that little gap that you can explore what little hope that they do have. And again, for the person who asked about the negativity, more than happy to either email me and we can chat in due course. Somebody else said, in the end, it's about establishing a personal connection with work, something we achieve together. How do you get older managers to change from the mindset? You're being paid in a professional environment. What more do you want? I'm just kind of soaking this up. How do you get older managers to change from the mindset you're being paid in a professional? Okay, yeah, that is tricky. I think, yeah, I think the game has changed over the years, and I haven't got anything conclusive on that. A lot of people, and if I'm picking up right here, Lisa, I hear people say, well, you know, they want extra time off. They want extra money. You know, they want to do this and they want to do that. Well, just do your job. You're being paid to do your job. Isn't that enough? But it would seem that the tide is shifting quite a lot on that. I'm working with a lot of trades that are working with younger generation people, and it's just a real challenge. So I don't know, Lisa, if I picked that up. Again, happy for you to email and we can chat about that more. But the gist of it, I'm getting asked that pretty frequently. Yeah, you're being paid in a professional environment. What more do you want? So, and this is where this whole thing of nuanced leadership from the side helps. I'm going to just flick across. I just want to share one more slide with you, potentially one more, and to give you and tell you one story, and then I've got a commitment to be finished by right on time, because I like to finish on time. So I'm going to share my screen. Yeah. All right, I'm just going to skip across a couple. Okay, so that's pretty big on the screen. This is something that has come out of my study in behaviorism, and I just want to give this a little bit of a broader view. So on the left, we've got the cause. On the right, we've got the effect. So under the cause side, we've got the personal domain and the work domain. So if you have a look at the personal domain, this is really the makeup of what goes on in a person's world, similar to that list, just a bit more concise. People have these areas going on in their personal world. Then they come into the work domain, and they've got all these other conditions and these conditions help people thrive, survive, or decline. And I'll tell you a very quick story to illustrate that. When I'm called in to coach or consult a company, normally there's a performance issue, job performance. That might be workflows, strategy issues, clarity, and a lot of it is people oriented, time management, people management, and enhancing. And oftentimes I find, not all the time, there's an interfering state. Something gets in the way for the person. So I'm working right back to left. Their performance is suffering. What's getting in the way? And then what in their personal world and their work world is actually contributing to that interfering state or job performance. Very quick story. If any of you have been on my webinars before, you may have heard this story, very powerful. I had a client call me one day and he said, I've got a girl here. I'd like you to just call in once a week and just give us some support, just help her. And I said, what seems to be the problem? And he said, well, she sits at a desk with her head in her hands for 2, 3, 4 hours a day and doesn't do any work. And I said, what's the issue? He said, I've no idea. And I said to him, you know, I'm not a psychologist. And he's like, yeah, I know. I just want you to, dial in and give her support. I said, well, it's above my pay grade. I'm not going to charge you for this. But I said, oh, no, I can just make a phone call every week. So anyway, as I got to know her, I came to learn that this interfering state was full-blown panic attacks. Now, to the boss's credit, my client, and I had an employment lawyer who I shared this story. He said, she said, most bosses at that point, they're sitting at their desk not working. They would have just, given them the flick as quick as they can. But this guy just said, support it. So anyway, this interfering state was full-blown panic attacks. So I worked with her over a period of 6 to 9 months, eventually got paid for it. And what we started to do was adjust things in her personal world. As I found out about it, this is leadership aside, taking an interest, connection, rapport building. We started changing some of the things in her personal world to decrease stress. So we started eliminating or deleting, eliminating contact with negative friends or minimizing it. She was a very structured person, and she had just moved house, and all her clothes were all over the place in her bedroom. And so I said, well, why don't you go and buy yourself some drawers and neatly stack them? And because that was stressing out this pile of clothes. She started getting up at 5 a.m. and she started eating breakfast and getting to work earlier. They were the little changes in her personal world that we adjusted over time. And every time she made an adjustment, we talk about her stress levels that were starting to drop down. Into the work domain, we changed, she arrived at work earlier. We moved her desk so she had space between her colleagues because it was stressing her out. She was in an open office and she had colleagues in her ears. We tweaked her job role. She was very structured, and she was in as a service coordinator role with 5 others, a very large company. And so we pulled her, with the management, to their credit, pulled her off the front line so she was more of a sweeper and took the pressure off. And we dialed up the support of management. Over the course of 6 to 9 months, those panic attacks. Oh, and she went to the GP in her personal world as well and got some medication throughout the process. And so over the 6 to 9 months, those panic attacks disappeared. And it was from making those adjustments and shifts in the personal world and the work world. Now, that's a tricky thing if you're a business owner or a manager and you think, geez, I've got to do that for everyone. This was a particular process I went through. But needless to say, those kind of things work when we understand that there's conditions in a person's personal world and then conditions at work that we have control over as managers and business owners. Can be some of the shifts can be very, very powerful. And just the last thing to say there too is that one of the things I get managers and I remind managers to do, if you catch someone doing it right, make sure you tell them. So if you see a behavior that you want to see repeated, make sure you tell the person, that's great, doing a great job. I love how you did that. The quality of that work, that phone call was amazing. You just catch them doing it right, and you make sure you reinforce it with some kind of intermittent praise. 5 minutes left. Any further questions? Comments? Was that helpful? Should we have another one? I think I've got a whole another section I didn't get to. I enjoy this stuff. I love the people side. I often say to people that, process is relatively easy. You change an input, you're almost guaranteed an output, but the variables of working with people are just numerous. And the other thing I should say too is that I've given up on the notion that people shouldn't bring their personal worlds into work, because the whole thing is very integrated, and for people to get that detachment between home and work is, yeah, it can be a tricky thing these days, especially if, you know, they've ran over the cat in the morning, or they've got sick kids, and the list goes on. Any other questions, comments, or I'll just give you a minute if there's anything else. All right, well, we'll leave it there. I'll hand over to you, Maddie. Oh, actually, one thing I should say, sorry, Maddie. I meant to do a final, just to mention something to you guys. Sorry, this was my oversight, and I'll only just take a minute. I'll just go through here. Just these are my details. You'll get these through on the slide. Just feel free to email me, ray@rayhodge.com.au. If you've got any further questions about today you want to share, that's fine. I have a weekly piece of writing, weekly mindful motivation, lots of trade and construction on there. It's very concise. I promise you won't take hours to read it, like a lot of newsletters these days. I always say to people, subscribe, and if you think it's crap, you can always unsubscribe. And if you do subscribe, I'll send you the free chapter this week from my book, How Efficiency Changes the Game on People and People Management. And from attending today, you'll get 20% discount off the courses, and they'll be in the email that Mara sends to you as well. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And Mara, now I'll hand back over to you.
Thank you, Ray. That was awesome. Some really good insights that you shared with us today. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and I hope that this provided you some clarity on how to better operate your teams more efficiently. So a recording of the webinar will be available on the NECA Vic website if you want to rewatch or share with your team. But thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.